Virgo, I am going to try to deliver this slowly because what I have to say to you today deserves the space of a slow delivery rather than the rushed and compressed form of someone trying to get to the news before the full weight of what the news means has had time to settle into the delivery itself and into you as the person receiving it. Try Not to Cry is the title, and I put it there honestly, not as a dramatic device designed to prime the emotion before anything emotional has actually arrived, but as the accurate description of what tends to happen when what I am about to describe lands in someone who needed to hear it for longer than they have been hearing it. Try not to cry, but also, if you do, that is completely appropriate to what this message contains and what it means for where you are right now in your specific life and your specific story and the specific season you are in. When this message is finding you, welcome and breathe. Before I continue, I want to start by saying something about where you are right now before I get to the news, because where you are is part of why the news is jaw-dropping and why it produces the try not to cry quality that the title is naming. You have been in something for some time, something that has required of you the particular form of endurance that is less dramatic than heroism and more demanding than most people who are not in it would fully appreciate if they were looking at it from outside without the full weight of the interior experience, that only the person inside it has full access to. The endurance looked like continuing on ordinary days, in ordinary ways, without the dramatic gestures that would make the difficulty visible to people who were not looking closely enough to see what ordinary continuation was costing in the specific form that it was costing it for someone in your particular situation and your particular season. I see it, what it has cost in the form of the specific endurance that ordinary days require of someone who is carrying something and continuing anyway without making the carrying visible or asking for the acknowledgement that the carrying deserved from the people around you who were benefiting from the continuing without always seeing the cost of the continuing to the person doing it. I see it. And the news I have for you today is connected to that seeing in the specific way that jaw-dropping news always is, connected to the period that preceded it and what that period required of the person who is now in the position of receiving the jaw-dropping nature of what is arriving. Let me build toward the news slowly, because the building matters, and the news will land more completely if you are fully in the building rather than trying to skip ahead to the jaw-dropping part before the context for the jaw-dropping has been fully established. Something has been shifting in the energy around your life over a period that you may have been aware of or may have been too close to see clearly as the shift it actually is, rather than as the ordinary fluctuation of circumstances that are simply continuing in their ordinary form without the particular direction that a real shift carries. When you know how to read it, the shift has a direction, and the direction is toward you, not metaphorically, not in the general sense of things getting better, in the slowly improving form of life getting better, incrementally, over time, in ways that are visible only in retrospect. When you look back at where you were and compare it to where you are now, after enough time has passed, for the improvement to have accumulated into something measurable in the specific and concrete form of something moving in your direction that is going to be visible and felt and known in the real and present tense of arriving rather than the retrospective tense of having already arrived. By the time you were looking back to see where it came from, I want to tell you what is moving toward you in the specific terms of the jaw-dropping news that the title is promising and that I want to deliver in the full and careful form it deserves, rather than in the rushed form that skips the building and goes straight to the reveal without the emotional architecture that the reveal requires to produce what it is capable of producing in someone who is fully present and fully in the building. When the reveal arrives, you are about to be chosen in the specific and unambiguous form of someone who is selected from among whatever other options were available by someone or something with the power and the discernment to have chosen otherwise, and who chose you, specifically in the full and deliberate form of a choice that was made after full consideration of what was available and who arrived at you as the answer. I want to let that sit for a moment before I continue, because the sitting is part of the receiving. You are about to be chosen in a way that is going to make your jaw drop, not because you did not deserve to be chosen, but because the choosing is arriving in a form and from a direction and with a completeness that the preceding season, with its particular quality of difficulty and endurance and ordinary continuation, did not prepare you to expect in quite this form or at quite this level of completeness. The choosing is more than you were expecting. In whatever form you were allowing yourself to expect something to arrive in the preceding season's particular way of making certain expectations feel possible and other expectations feel like the kind of hoping that produces disappointment more reliably than results when it is applied to things that seem too large or too good for the circumstances that surround the hoping. The choosing exceeds what you allowed yourself to hope for. And the exceeding is the jaw-dropping part. Whew. I want to speak about the specific form of endurance that the preceding season required of you, because I think naming it precisely is part of what makes the choosing so significant and so connected to what you were doing while the choosing was being prepared on the other side of the distance between you and it. The endurance was the endurance of uncertainty, not the dramatic uncertainty of a crisis, where the stakes are visible and the difficulty is obvious, and the endurance required is the kind that others can see and acknowledge and honor with the specific recognition that visible difficulty receives from the people who are witnessing it, the quieter uncertainty of not knowing whether what you were doing was leading anywhere or whether the path you were on was the right path, or whether the standard you were holding yourself to was going to produce anything other than the exhaustion of having held a standard without the confirmation that the standard was producing what it was supposed to produce in the form that confirmation takes when it finally arrives, which it had not yet done, in the preceding season. For as long as the preceding season lasted, you held the standard anyway, through the quiet uncertainty and the ordinary continuation. That did not look like heroism from outside, but that required something from inside that most people would not have sustained for as long as you sustained it without the confirmation that what was being sustained was building toward this, which is the choosing that is now arriving in the jaw-dropping form that makes sense of the endurance. In retrospect, even though the endurance was happening without the retrospect available as justification for continuing, in the moment of the continuing, that is the endurance. And the choosing is what it was building toward all along. In the specific dimensions it is arriving in, so you know what you are receiving when it arrives in whatever concrete form your specific life delivers the abstract of being chosen. In the relational dimension, the choosing looks like someone stepping forward with the full and unambiguous statement of wanting you, not in the tentative or partial form, of someone who is still deciding or still managing the risk of fully expressing what they feel, but in the complete and declared form of someone who has finished the deciding and arrived at the declaration and is delivering it in the full and deliberate way of someone who chose and wants to be known to have chosen by the person they chose. In the material or professional dimension, the choosing looks like a recognition from a source with the authority to recognize, in the form that authority recognitions take when they are real and deliberate, and the result of someone seeing clearly what you have been offering in whatever specific dimension your effort and your gift and your particular capacity has been directed, and deciding that it is worth recognizing in the specific and concrete form of an opportunity or a position or a yes to something you presented or a door opening that was previously not open or not open in the form it is now opening. In the internal dimension, the choosing looks like the specific and embodied recognition that happens in someone when the external world confirms something that they had to hold alone in the interior of their own knowing without external confirmation for longer than was comfortable or reassuring in the preceding season that was not yet providing the external evidence that the internal knowing was real rather than only hopeful. The external choosing confirms the internal knowing and the confirmation of something you knew alone for a long time by something outside yourself is among the most moving experiences available to human beings in the form of a recognition that says what you knew about yourself was true all along, and the world has caught up to the knowing in the form of the choosing. I want to say something about the internal knowing that I think you deserve to hear, specifically and directly, before the external choosing arrives to confirm it. The internal knowing that you have been holding through the preceding season in the quiet and private form of a knowing that had not yet been confirmed by anything outside yourself was accurate. What you knew about yourself in the moments when the knowing was clear, before the noise of the difficult season made it harder to hear, was the truth in the specific and complete form of someone who knows something real about who they are and what they carry and what they deserve from the world they are moving through. The world was not always returning. In that season, what the knowing said was owed to it, but the world's failure to return what was owed did not make the knowing wrong. It made the world slow in catching up to the knowing, which is a different thing entirely than the knowing being inaccurate. The world is catching up in the form of the choosing that is now arriving in the jaw-dropping form of something that confirms what you knew all along in the private and unconfirmed form that the preceding season was the only available form of the knowing before the external confirmation arrived, which is now not because the news is sad, but because the confirmation of something you held alone for a long time in the interior of your own knowing. Without the external confirmation, that would have made the holding easier, arriving finally in the concrete and undeniable form of being chosen by something with the authority to choose produces tears in the specific form of the tears that are not sad, but that are the physical expression of a relief so complete that the body needs to do something with it other than simply hold it internally in the form it arrives which is too large for the interior alone and requires expression in the form that the body has available for things this size, which is tears. Ugh. Try not to cry, but also let the tears come if they need to, because what they are expressing is real and proportionate and appropriate to what is arriving and what it means. After the season that preceded it and what was required in that season to arrive at this one as the person who is now being chosen. I want to speak about what you should do with the choosing when it arrives, because receiving a choosing of this magnitude after a season of the kind of endurance I described requires something specific from the person receiving it that I want to name directly before it arrives. So you are prepared for what it requires. Receive it completely, without the qualification that the preceding season may have trained into you in the specific form of this seems too good, or what is the catch, or I should not get too excited because things this good, in my experience, do not always stay this good. After the initial arrival has worn into the ordinary and the full picture has become available, those qualifications are the armor of the endurance season, and they served you in the form of protection against disappointment. During the time the armor was needed and the endurance was the primary available experience, the armor is not needed now. What is arriving does not require protection against, and wearing the armor into the choosing will prevent the full landing of something that deserves to land completely in the full and open form of someone who has set the armor down for the receiving of this specific thing, which is the thing the armor was always protecting toward, without knowing that was what it was doing. Set the armor down for this before I close this message, and let what I have described begin to arrive in the real form of your actual life, in whatever specific shape the choosing takes for you in your specific circumstances and your specific story. You are always going to be chosen by what is choosing you now in this specific form, at this specific moment, in this specific season, not because it was guaranteed in some predetermined form, but because of who you are and what you carry and the specific quality of what you have been bringing to the ordinary days of the demanding season. That produced the person who is now being chosen as the natural and proportionate result of everything that person has been and done and become in the time of the endurance that the title is honoring with the try not to cry. That is the most honest acknowledgement available of how significant this is. The jaw-dropping news is this: you were worth choosing all along, and something that knows that is choosing you now in the full and deliberate form of a choice that was made. Specifically, after everything was considered and you were the answer. Try not to cry. But if you do, let them be the tears of someone who has been told, finally, what they needed to hear for longer than they should have had to wait. To hear it, you were always worth it. And now something knows it out loud in the form of a choosing that you cannot explain away or minimize or manage into something smaller than what it actually is. Receive it in the full size of what it is,